Miso- Greetings, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event, Misogynoir Transformed: Black Women's Digital Resistance, a book presentation by author Moya Bailey, who will later be joined in conversation by my colleague, Cathy J. Cohen. My name is C. Riley Snorton, Interim Faculty Director of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, CSRPC, and Professor of English and Gender and Sexuality Studies at the University of Chicago. And it is my privilege to introduce tonight's event, co-sponsored by the CSRPC and the Seminary Co-op. Many thanks to the staff at the center and the Seminary Co-op bookstore, without whose labor this would not be possible. Tonight, we will deepen our understanding of anti-Black misogyny, the place where racism and sexism meet. When Moya Bailey first coined the term misogynoir, she defined it as the ways anti-Black and misogynistic representation shape broader ideas about Black women, particularly in visual culture and digital spaces. Dr. Bailey had no idea that the term would go viral, touching a cultural nerve and quickly entering into the lexicon. Misogynoir now has its own Wikipedia page and hashtag, and has been featured on Comedy Central's The Daily Show and CNN's Cuomo's Prime Time. In Misogynoir Transformed, Bailey delves into her groundbreaking concept, highlighting Black women's digital resistance to anti-Black misogyny on YouTube, Facebook, Tumblr, and other platforms. At a time when Black women are depicted as more ugly, deficient, hypersexual, and unhealthy than their non-Black counterparts, Bailey explores how Black women have bravely used social media platforms to confront misogynoir in a number of courageous and, most importantly, effective ways. Focusing on queer and trans Black women, she shows us the importance of carving out digital spaces where communities are built around queer Black web shows and hashtags like the hashtag Girls Like Us. Across the text, Bailey shows how Black women actively reimagine the world by engaging in powerful forms of digital resistance at a time when anti-Black misogyny is thriving on social media and in other platforms. A groundbreaking work, Misogynoir Transformed highlights Black women's remarkable efforts to disrupt mainstream narratives, subvert negative stereotypes, and reclaim their lives. So before turning this over to Dr. Bailey for her discussion of this urgently needed and magnificent project, allow me to share a bit more about her and the person she will be in conversation with today. Starting with a bit of good news, beginning in the fall of 2021, Moya Bailey will be our neighbor as an associate professor of communication at Northwestern University. Currently, Bailey is the digital alchemist for the Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network and an MLK visiting scholar at MIT and faculty in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Northeastern University, where her work focuses on Black women's use of digital media to promote social justice as acts of self-affirmation and health promotion. Bailey is broadly interested in how race, gender, and sexuality are represented in media and medicine, and curates the hashtag TransformDH Tumblr initiative in digital humanities. She's also a monthly sustainer of the Allied Media Conference, through which she is able to bridge her passion for social justice and her work in digital humanities. Bailey is a co-author of Hashtag Activism, Networks of Race and Gender Justice, published in 2020 with MIT Press, and the author of Misogynoir Transformed: Black Women's Digital Resistance, published in fresh off the presses with New York University Press, and the book which provides us the occasion to join together this evening. Following Dr. Bailey's remarks, she'll be joined in conversation with Cathy J. Cohen, the David and Mary Winton Green Distinguished Service Professor of Political Science and former faculty director of the CSRPC, among her many roles that she holds and has held at the University of Chicago. Cohen is the author of 2 books, The Boundaries of Blackness, AIDS and the Breakdown of Black Politics, published with UChicago Press, and Democracy Remixed: Black Youth and the Future of American Politics with Oxford University Press. She's also co-editor of the anthology Women Transforming Politics, an Alternative Reader with NYU Press, and also published, co-edited with Kathleen Jones and Joan Tronto. She's the author of numerous journal articles and book chapters, and is the creator and currently oversees two, and I'll put an asterisk there, at least two major research and public-facing projects, the Gen Forward Survey and the Black Youth Project, notable among them. She's a recipient of numerous prestigious awards, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and co-editor with Frederick Harris of a book series at Oxford University Press entitled Transgressing Boundaries, Studies in Black Politics and Black Communities. Following their discussion, there will also be time for them to answer your questions. So please do ask your questions by using the Q&A box or drop them in the chat. And to continue the conversation beyond this hour, you can follow them on Twitter at MoyaZB and at Cathy J. Cohen. Now, please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Moya Bailey.
Oh, thank you so much, Riley. That was such a wonderful introduction. Thank you all so much for having me. I am absolutely excited to be here and to be able to talk to Cathy Cohen, which I have to say, Cathy invited me to my very first academic public speaking engagement at the Hip Hop Feminism Conference at U Chicago. And that really transformed everything for me and really made this book and my thinking about this possible. I want to begin by just saying that I am joining you all from Boston on land that is traditionally stewarded by the Massachusetts, the Wampanoag, and the Pawtucket. And I bring that up even when we're in digital space to remind us that the mechanisms of settler colonialism are still operating, whether or not we are acknowledging that, even as we are doing our work in digital space. So to start, I'm going to begin with the preface from the book and just give a little bit of context of how I got here. And I'll end with a little bit from the conclusion that was really sparked by Cathy's remarks at a conference that informed my thinking about misogynoir more broadly. So this is from the preface. Although I did not know it at the time, I started writing this book as an undergraduate at Spelman College. I was on the road to becoming a medical doctor when two things happened that made me shift course. I fell in love with women's studies, and I got international attention as one of the leaders of a small pushback on campus against the rapper Nelly. Both events profoundly shaped my thinking about the way Black women are treated in society and moved me to coin the term misogynoir, which in turn led to this book. As a first-year student from tiny Fayetteville, Arkansas, I was appalled when Dr. Beverly Guy-Sheftall told the Spelman College entering class of 2005 about Sarah Baartman's experiences as a human exhibit in Europe during the early 19th century. Baartman, a young Khoisan woman from what we now recognize as South Africa, was displayed throughout Europe to paying white audiences as an example of the animalistic and inferior nature of the African woman. Implicit in her display was a comparison between her body and that of the white women who viewed her. European scientists equated Baartman's anatomical differences with sexual deviance, drawing conclusions about her sexuality and subsequently the sexuality of Black women from her form. Her butt and genitalia were used to justify racist and sexualized violence, as well as the continued enslavements of Africans in the quote-unquote New World. Dr. Guy-Sheftall explained that the exploitative way Baartman's body was treated in life and in death was made possible under the guise of quote-unquote objective science, though what Baartman actually endured was objectification through scientific racism and sexism. In my first week at Spelman, before I had even attended a class, Dr. Guy-Sheftall had challenged my thinking by describing the differential treatment Black women experienced on a global stage. After that moment, I knew I wanted to take every class I could with her. I was awakened to the profundity of the unique nexus of experience that is Black and woman on this planet and throughout colonial history. Along with enrolling in Dr. Guy Sheftall's classes, I took classes with fellow feminist professor Dr. Bahati Kuumba, or as we affectionately called her, Dr. K, who gave me the final nudge into the open arms of the comparative women's studies major at Spelman. As I was matriculating, I also got involved in the feminist political organizations on campus, all of which were supported by the Women's Research and Resource Center, the home of the Comparative Women's Studies Department. It was Dr. K who asked, "You're taking all the classes, why not be a major?" And when she put it that way, there was really no room for rebuttal. But in truth, I was already a willing convert, despite still having every intention of attending medical school, but that was not to be. As a 19-year-old junior and then president of the Feminist Majority Leadership Alliance, I showed the group Nelly's music video for the song Tip Drill, which had started airing on the late night television show BET Uncut. The video featured most memorably a scene where Nelly slides a credit card down the crack of a Black woman's butt. Our group decided to name him our misogynist of the month, not knowing that the Spelman Student Government Association had agreed to partner with Nelly and his foundation to hold a bone marrow registration drive on our campus in an effort to save the life of his sister who had leukemia. FMLA raised questions about the misogynoir in his videos and lyrics, and when we heard that Nelly was invited to campus, it seemed only fair that we ask him about the way he represented Black women, since he was asking us for our help. Nelly declined our offer to talk about his music. Instead, he went to the press, twisting the story such that it seemed that Spelman canceled the bone marrow registration drive because of the video, an assertion that many still believe today, though we orchestrated our own drive. The story garnered national and eventually international headlines, both praising and condemning Spelman students for daring to talk back to the music. And I'll insert here that this is how I came to know Cathy Cohen and got the invitation to attend the Hip Hop Feminism Conference. But at the time, this moment was a hard lesson in the hypervisibility and invisibility of being a Black woman. Nelly felt entitled to our assistance with saving his sister's life, but did not feel that he had to address us, the Black women who dealt with the fallout of his video and lyrics in our everyday lives. As young Black women, we felt the impact of the video and lyrics in the form of street harassment in the United States and abroad. We dealt with assumptions about our sexual availability to men in the form of unsolicited commentary on our bodies, on our clothing, and on our time. He used his celebrity built on the bodies of Black women to urge people to support an underappreciated cause, the health of Black women. Black women are far less likely to find a matching bone marrow donor than their white woman counterparts, in part because of Black people's deep distrust of the systemic racism in medicine, which makes them less likely to volunteer to donate. What was not quite clear to me in 2004 was the irony of using a fame garnered through limiting representations of Black women while refusing to address that decision and also wanting support from those very same Black women. I wasn't quite able to connect the dots between popular media representations of Black women and my and other Black women's experiences with discriminatory housing practices, intimate partner violence, street harassment, employment discrimination, and ill treatment from healthcare providers. But my interest in the role media plays in shaping the perceptions of Black women became all-consuming, such that the goal of becoming a medical doctor morphed into getting a doctorate to investigate the role that media representations play in the treatment of Black women patients by white doctors. I learned about the ways historical popular culture seeped into the consciousness of supposedly objective future physicians, which prompted me to consider how popular cultural representations influence Black women's treatment in society and medicine today. It was in writing that dissertation that I landed on the word misogynoir to describe the particular venom directed at Black women through negative representations in media. How do you describe the ways that Black women are uniquely denigrated because of their gender and race? I played with a couple of terms, which I won't share here because they were pretty awful, before landing on misogynoir. Initially, the term existed only in my dissertation until 2008, when I was invited to join the Crown Feminist Collective, an online blogging community of feminists of color. From 2008 to 2013, the CFC dominated the think piece blogosphere with insightful and pithy commentary on popular culture, primarily through the lens of hip-hop feminism. At its height, the CFC blog was home to 14 Black and feminist of color bloggers who wrote about the news of the day, paying special attention to highlight the intersection of race and gender in their writing. Founded by then graduate students at Emory University in Atlanta, the CFC bridged a seemingly contradictory love for crunk hip hop music that dominated the radio airwaves in the aughts and the feminist theory they were learning in grad school. The blog was a space for timely and incisive criticism, and my first post, "They Aren't Talking About Me," discussed my concern about my own apathetic response to misogynoir in music. It was the word's first appearance outside of my diss. Once I used the word, other members of the collective started to use the term, and it appeared in more CFC posts. From there, some members of the blogosphere began to use it, but no one more compellingly than womanist blogger Trudy at her now sunsetted Gradient Layer. Her work introduced online communities to the word, and she deftly articulated its utility. Her work and others helped the term reach a wide range of audiences, including an international one. As Riley said at the top of the talk, I did not expect it to go viral. And in addition to the places he mentioned it appearing, it also was recently on an episode of Charmed, the Charmed reboot. So I couldn't really imagine all of the different ways that the term has moved through popular culture. And its wide reach made it something that I felt like needed to be further theorized, and something that is perhaps interesting to people, not just in the academy, but definitely outside of it. And I hope that in addition to creating a term that is useful, I've created a book that is useful to the communities with which I study. I hope that that future efforts similar to the successful campaigns and actions I described here will further improve the lives of Black women and their communities. And before I end, I wanted to highlight one of the real moments that the work is trying to move us to talk about Black women in a different way. In the book, I really center Black, queer, and trans women because I feel like people assume Black women is cis and heterosexual. And in thinking about that, but also trying to be attentive to all of the people who experience misogynoir, I conclude by thinking about Sandra Bland. And that is really what connects to some remarks Cathy had at Critical Ethnic Studies. So I'll just read this little paragraph and then we'll get into Q&A. That Sandra Bland's story finds its way into this book that centers the digital alchemy of Black, queer, and trans women is a bit counterintuitive, given that Bland used her YouTube channel to express some homophobic views. But Bland need not have perfect politics to be deserving of Black queer feminist attention, especially when misogynoir played such a huge role in how she was treated by the police before and likely during her untimely death. As queer theorist Cathy Cohen has illustrated, the deaths of ostensibly healthy cis straight subjects still necessitate queer theoretical attention. In her keynote address at the 2010 Critical Ethnic Studies Association conference, Cohen began her talk with a horrific tale of a young Black life lost too soon. 16-year-old Darian Albert was beaten to death by other teens on the street in the late summer of 2009. Of his passing and its connection to queer theoretical interventions, Cohen offered the following. Darian and other young folks of color operate as queer subjects, the targets of racial normalizing projects intent on pathologizing across the dimensions of race, class, gender, and sexuality. By normalizing their degradation, marginalization, and invisibility, it becomes something to which we no longer pay attention. Like Cohen, I see the ubiquity of Black extrajudicial killings queering those they touch. The visible markers of difference written into the bodies, clothes, and mannerisms of these queered subjects make them targets for violence and injury, despite being otherwise healthy individuals. For Black women, misogynoir exacerbates their vulnerability, making them frequent targets in the crosshairs of injustice and harm. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions and comments from Cathy. Thank you so much.
Well, Moya, thank you. That was a beautiful reading for a beautiful book. Sometimes we talk about the incisiveness of a book or the impact of a book, but there is a beauty, right? When we get to see people, see ourselves, we're worthy of analysis and critical thinking. And so I want to thank you for that in the book. Moya already did some work to kind of situate us, but I do want to say she was a young, brilliant, bright undergrad when I first met her, but I actually heard of you prior to that from Beverly, who was like, you won't believe this incredible undergraduate on campus. So it has just been lovely to watch, your brilliance flower and, now to have you as a neighbor at Northwestern. I'm going to put the warning out for now. There's always southward movement. So, so I'm thrilled to be here in conversation with you. I love that you called it a question and answer. I have a lot of questions. Some of that will be conversational, but hopefully more of it is really just you thinking and talking us through the book. I want to remind people, if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer. There will be time later where we can go through your questions. But, there's so much in the book. But let's just talk about, first of all, and I think it's in the first chapter, you kind of lay out a history of the ways in which kind of anti-Black misogyny appears, right? You talk about Mammy and Sapphire narratives, you talk about the forced sterilization of Black women, you talk about the trope of the welfare queen and the impact of the Moynihan report, you talk about the crack epidemic and crack babies, therefore being crack mothers, right? I can go through, but then you take us into this moment, kind of, you tell the story of kind of digital dragging and the creation of Peaches and Shit Black Girls Say. So I'm wondering if you can help people think about how is all that connected? Like, would you argue that all of that is kind of misogynoir? I don't think you would, but I think that there is a kind of deep connection that you want to kind of lay this groundwork before you pivot towards where we are today. So
yeah, I thought it was important to think about the history that informed my thinking about misogynoir even before I named it. And so I didn't want misogynoir to come out of a vacuum. It's very much situated and rooted in the writings of Black women who have come before me. It's situated in Black feminist responses to these representations and representations that have informed and shaped our living since our non-consensual arrival in the Americas. So for me, it felt really important to name how misogynoir erupts and comes through in some of these early forms of media, and also that those early forms of media help seed the media that exists now. So I was working on this dissertation, as I mentioned, looking at medical doctors, and I was looking at yearbooks and how Black women were described in those texts. And then to go from that to Facebook, which is designed, you know, out of and from the idea of a yearbook. Facebook gets its name from thinking about yearbooks and how they move and operate in our society. So it seemed like a natural progression to think about how these social media platforms are operating and how that compared to some of the earlier media that was informing representations of Black women. So that was one of the ways I tried to make that connection, that through line for people who are reading the book.
Okay, so now if we think about this moment though, because really there's, I wouldn't say a pivot, that there's an anchoring for you in a discussion of kind of digital media, visual culture today. What's the significance or what's the break, right? I mean, we could tell a story about media always denigrating Black women, and then we'll talk a bit about who you mean by Black women. But there's, I feel like there's something more you want to say about the technologies that are available to us that both, of course, allow for the denigration, but also the resistance. So,
absolutely. There's a real ease of access when it comes to social media platforms that I think wasn't available to us before. So the fact that you can hold a camera in your palm with your cell phone, that definitely creates more opportunities for people to create and challenge some of these representations. So I think the resistance has changed, and also so has the speed with which images travel. The way that something can go viral so quickly is definitely something that the digital allows for that is a bit different from the mainstream media platforms of before and even of this moment. Social media moves way more quickly than traditional media outlets. And because of that, the harm can move just as fast, but also the resistance and the pushback can move more quickly as well. It gives us an opportunity to challenge some of those representations in an immediate way. One of my favorite examples of this is from the hashtag activism book that I worked on with Sarah J. Jackson and Brooke Foucault-Wells. And the foreword to that book is written by Jeannie Warren, who's somebody who didn't really think of herself as an activist, but after George Zimmerman was acquitted and George Zimmerman's, the jury, one of the jury members was looking to get a book deal and had an editor. Jeannie Warren found out about this and thought that that was really unfair and it didn't make sense for someone to profit off the death of Trayvon Martin. She mobilized people using Twitter and created a hashtag campaign, and that book deal was canceled in less than 24 hours. So that is one of the beauties, I think, of this digital moment, is that we can challenge and move at a speed that we perhaps couldn't move before.
Completely agreed. Okay, so now I'm going to ask, though, you know, there is a narrative out there that I think we probably both hate about the democratization of media and power that comes from social media, which is not really true, but okay. But I do think there's an interesting kind of complication for us in your book about the reproduction of misogynoir right? When you have a media, as you say, that is incredibly accessible and accessible to other Black people, right? So I'm gonna lean on you to tell some of the in particular the first chapter where you're saying, look, there are these kind of memes and you can see I'm not fully fluent in right.
You're doing great, Cathy.
Postings, tweets, no, that demean Black women, but that are also being produced by Black women, right? Lena Waithe in particular. And so we got to complicate our understanding of where misogynoir comes from, who controls it, you know, and how it gets replicated. So I don't know if you want to say a bit about that.
Yeah. So particularly in thinking about Lena Waithe, I talk about the fact that people don't really realize that she was the writer of the Shit Black Girls Say skit that was popular online, that was making fun of how people imagine Black women to be. And this was performed by comedian Billy Searles, and he does this performance in drag, pretending to be this Black woman, Peaches. And in this performance of her, she is rendered as essentially a caricature of Black women. And all of the things that are written into that performance or into that portrayal really harken back to some of the stereotypes that you mentioned before that I referenced. So there's elements of the sapphire, there's elements of the Jezebel, all of that is wrapped into this portrayal of this character. And I think there is a sense that, well, all we need to do is to put people who have certain identities in control in the writer's room, etc. But of course, that is never the case, because we have to think about politics. And honestly, Cathy, I mean, punks, bull daggers, and welfare queens was really one of the pieces that informed my thinking about this, you know, that just sharing an identity does not necessarily mean that you have a political solidarity or that you have the same ideas about what should happen collectively at the level of what kind of art we should be producing. And of course, I'm not interested in policing people's art and what they create, but I do think that we have to be more discerning about what we uplift and what our actual goals are, because to me, it doesn't seem that the goal is just to get certain identities in place, but we should be thinking about what is the content that people are creating. Are we getting a diversity of content, or are we only allowed to succeed if we replicate what's already in the dominant paradigm?
Okay, so there is this, to me, that's the part of the beauty of the book, right? Is the complexity that you're asking us to engage, right? To think at multiple registers. And you talk about, for example, you said, or something like this, that transformation does not necessarily equal feminist, that Black woman doesn't equal Black feminist. And so why the importance, I mean, I think you said it, but the importance of making sure that people understand those distinctions, because that also, it seems, kind of shapes how we understand the resistance on display in chapters 2, 3, and 4, right? That some of it is about Black feminist resistance, some of it is about something different. I don't know what, that's my reading. What's your?
Yes, that's exactly it. I mean, I see queer web shows and I'm excited by them, but they're not always all the time feminist. And I think people have an assumption that somehow a marginalized identity means a radical politic. And I think we have so many examples of that not being true, but we kind of want to hold on to that. And I wanted to challenge where that's happening within our community. You know, we have the very public example right now of Caitlyn Jenner, who has not changed her politics in any way, shape, or form from what she's probably believed her whole life. But there's an assumption that an identity and joining with a certain community means that somebody's politics will be aligned. And clearly that's not the case. So one thing that I wanted to show was that Black women aren't automatically feminist, that is something that's a politic and a practice. It's something that you do. It's in the choices that you make. And also when we think about the queer web shows that people create, sometimes they end up replicating things that we see in the dominant culture as well. So I wanted to both celebrate the pieces of possibility, the potential in those spaces, even as I wanted to be attentive to the places where they perhaps could go a bit further and realize that, our political dreams, hopes and dreams are not just derived from our identity. That's a starting place, perhaps of a place of potential, but it isn't guaranteed.
Okay, so but when we're thinking about political struggle, liberatory struggle, what do we do with that contradiction, right? Which is, you talk about, having some of these Black queer feminist series kind of make you laugh, or, and to find maybe that's a significant encounter, right? To bring joy, to bring relief, so how do we deal with the contradiction between wanting a truly kind of Black feminist product, but do we always have to assume contradiction within something we might call Black feminism?
Oh, okay, Cathy. Okay, you're taking me there. Do we have to assume? I think we do. I think that we're people, and so we struggle. Like, there is no purity of politics. And when we do that, it doesn't really land well. I'll tell this story about, I was in Ayoka Chinzira's class as an undergraduate at Spelman College in this film class, and we had the assignment to write a short film. And the short film that I wrote was very earnest, but it was really bad. And she told me that. She told me that it wasn't, but it was because I was trying to kind of meet my politics. And so the art kind of fell away. The narrative fell flat because it was so scripted and proscripted in what I imagined to be the right way to do things. And it was a real lesson in, art is messy. And so we need to think about the places where humans are. And humans ourselves are not in any way living up to a ideal, and that should not be the goal. I think one of the beauties of transformative justice and the idea of transformation is that it's always in flux. We're changing and we're growing with the information that we have, and that there is no stopping place. And that process actually becomes more important than product. And for me, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the web series themselves as well, because they created connection. And I think for the people who participated in them, expanded their thinking beyond perhaps where they started before the process. So I think that there's iterations and things that are coming afterwards that move us closer to the world that we want as well.
Right. There's so many things I loved in this book, but one is the language of messy, and it shows up in multiple chapters, right? Clearly you're like, okay, y'all some messy people. So let's try to make sense of this. And I guess you said a little bit already, but what do you think messy is doing for you? Is it like pushing at the boundaries? Is it saying there are just certain things we can't figure out, or we don't need to figure out. I mean, you know, you use, I was starting to count, like, yeah, there she said mess. No, not in a bad way, because it resonated.
No, but it's like, no, but it's good to know, because, you know, you don't always think about the words that you use.
That's frequently. A good thing, though. I mean, I think, you know, no, subconsciously you were trying to communicate something through the language of messy. And I don't know if you want to say anything more about it. If you don't, that's
yeah. I mean, I'm a Southerner, so I feel like messy is also part of, I don't know, my linguistic tradition. Just like, oh, she messy. And for me, that's also about signaling some of the possibility that exists in, you know, it's messy isn't just bad. It's a little bit desirable. Like, it's a little titillating. So like, somebody who is messy, you kind of want to know what's the story there. And I think that's the reality of humanity. And in my Octavia Butler reading and learning, I mean, that's it. Humans are messy. And can we overcome that messiness? I don't know. I think the jury's still out on whether humans can, and whether they should, honestly, given the way that we treat each other and treat the planet. But one of the things that has been a real joy for me in this process is to think about how creative and talented and I don't know, just the Black genius that is on display in all of these new platforms. I mean, the inventiveness and the creative possibilities are endless. And that, to me, is exciting, even when some of it doesn't land in a feminist way.
All right, I want to remind people, please put questions in the question and answer. I'm going to have to stop soon, even though I don't really want to. So I have two more questions I want to try to get to. One is, we didn't get a chance to really talk about digital alchemy and the ways in which you think about what you call kind of defensive versus generative, right? Again, two ways to think about this very important concept. So do you want to give an example of how you think about those differently? Right? Response versus creation.
Yes. So when thinking about defensive digital alchemy, I'm thinking of the creative ways people respond or react to something that's already occurring that is not great. So one of the examples that I give in the book is the hashtag Ruin a Black Girls Monday. And so there were ways that Black women responded to that hashtag and reacted to it that I thought were pretty funny and were definitely an example of digital alchemy, but it was in reaction to, it wasn't necessarily coming from a place of challenging or exploding the whole concept. And I think that there is generative digital alchemy that isn't as concerned with the negative representations. It's more concerned with, what are we creating for ourselves? What is it that we want to see? And I think that the web shows and some of the Tumblr curation that I witnessed was really representative of that, because it wasn't concerned with addressing misogynoir. That wasn't the point. The point was to create things that felt generative, and these platforms help seed and make possible forms of creation that weren't possible for them in an analog space. That is how I see generative digital alchemy taking place.
Okay. Second question, and then maybe there's time for a third, but I want to go back to this question of Black queer feminism and Black feminism in terms of your texts, right? Those of us who had the honor of writing blurbs for you, I was just noting, all reference this as a kind of, or at least I did, a Black queer feminist text for the 21st century. I'm wondering if you think of the book that way, right? And if so, what marks this text as a Black feminist or Black queer feminist? And this is part two, because there's just many parts to the question, which is it the subject? Are the subjects who are at the center? Is it about the vision of what we can do in terms of resistance? Like, why is this for you? Is it for you? And if it is, what is it about it? And I can tell you why I thought.
That is one that just warms my heart so much, Cathy. Thank you so much for saying that. It's hard to think about that work in this work in that way. It was, like you think I'm writing a book because that is what is required of my field. And so I did what was asked of me. And I felt like also that the way misogynoir was being discussed often didn't have I felt like the word was maybe getting away from me in some ways in terms of how it was being used in popular spaces. So the dissertation, as I mentioned, is more about health and misogynoir. And so this looks at that a little bit, but definitely it felt like it shifted much more directly into the digital, because that's where I see conversations moving. And I would say that my interest in writing the text was also to document some of the joy that I found in digital spaces online, that it captures a moment in the internet that unfortunately is already gone. Like these things are so ephemeral. And this book I could not have written now, because if I was just getting online, I wouldn't have the connections to the people that I had connections to, who I was able to interview or talk to, or even the connection to Janet Mock. It speaks to a real certain time in Twitter history and Tumblr history that I was a part of, and that I entered not as an academic, but that I entered as a practitioner, as a peer. And so I don't know that it would exist in this way had I not had the experiences that I had. So in that sense, I think of the book more as a love letter to the internet of, I don't know, a couple of years ago that no longer exists, and I don't know if it's ever coming back. So.
But is it a Black feminist love letter? Right, I'm trying to pull out the Black feminism in you, and if it is, I love that it's a love letter. And you're right, to the internet, because the internet is always changing, right? But if it's a Black feminist love letter, what makes it a Black feminist love letter, right? Like,
it's interesting. Okay, so this is the other piece. Because I went to Spelman and because of Beverly, I did not start saying Black feminist until I left that space, because at Spelman, feminism was always already ours. I didn't need to qualify it and say Black feminism. Feminism, capital F, was already mine. So I do think that I have, in my moving through the rest of the feminist worlds, it felt important to me to name Black queer feminism as my legacy, because those are the people who supported and shaped my thinking about these topics. That it was Black queer feminists who gave me the language and gave me permission, I think, to think about the world in a different way. That it was Black feminists and Black queer feminists who gave me, I don't know, the audacity to come up with my own word when writing a dissertation. Yeah.
Very good. All right. I wish I could continue this, but there are some questions that I want to make sure we get to. So here's one. As misogynoir has entered the mainstream, do you think people are getting the term right, in quotes? Do you have any critiques of its more mainstream usage? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that has happened is sometimes people use it to talk about racist misogyny generally. And the Black is pretty central to both the term itself and to how I understand it being used. Also, there's been some interesting conversations in relationship to Meghan Markle and some other very light-skinned or people who some would say don't experience misogynoir because they have a white parent or because they're quote unquote white passing, which is wild to me because I have and I know people who have, Black people in their family who are her complexion and have 2 Black parents. So kind of who counts under misogynoir is an interesting question. And I don't think that policing gets us closer to the world that we want. I think that there is a real shared experience in how misogynoir gets deployed when people are read as Black women, regardless of how they identify. And of course, that's one of the things I try to make clear in that first chapter is that misogynoir is definitely experienced by non-binary, agender, gender variant folks who are read as Black women, whether they identify that way or not.
I know we don't have much. This is a quick, you have to do 30 seconds here because you also, is it just about Black women? You talk about kind of writing about Black women on the margins or the shadows of Black women. What do you mean by that? And then I'm going to go to the next question.
Yeah, I think the shadows are those of us who perhaps, depending on the time of day, depending on, I don't know, the lighting, are we read as Black women? Are we not? People's inability to see us completely, that's its own form of misogynoir, as is the misogynoir that, happens when somebody misgenders someone and assumes that they're a Black woman despite their own identification.
Okay. Another question, I hope I'm getting this right. What are your thoughts about the complication of embodied Black women and femmes propagating anti-Black misogynoir in digital spaces? For example, Monique's critiques of Black women wearing bonnets and, I knew somebody told me, they were like, that bonnet question is gonna come up. So here we go. Monique's critiques of Black women wearing bonnets in public. Do you view this as internalized misogynoir? Let me keep. Does an act of okay, I think that's maybe that. Okay. And then there's another one.
Yes, I do see that as internalized misogynoir. And the unfortunate thing about misogynoir is that misogynoir is, equal opportunity. Anyone can met it out. And I definitely think that ideas about respectability and how we should be in public space are part of that question, are part of how misogynoir operates. We're living in a pandemic, and it just seems like the expectation that we go forward with business as usual and not question what our ideas are about what is proper comportment in this new reality that we're living in needs to be further unpacked. And I don't know, I don't want to go back necessarily to the world of before. I think we should take some of the lessons from now and think about how we might want to relate to each other in a different way, which includes questioning respectability in all of the ways it shows up.
Okay. All right. This is just great. Does an act of digital alchemy have to be generative in order to be operating inside of Black queer feminism?
Wow. No, I don't think it does. I think that a digital alchemy exists in ways that are taking the tools, the digital platforms that exist and using them in creative ways that the platform designers never intended. That's a real representation of digital alchemy to me. And so that doesn't always correspond with a Black queer feminist anything.
All right, now this is just wrong at the end of this conversation, which is to say, okay, we understand maybe the generative part versus the defensive part. for people who are wondering, okay, so what qualifies as Black queer feminism then in terms of digital alchemy? Or do you, without defining what that is, because that's a whole nother, is there an example you can point people to say, oh, this is what I mean?
What I mean of generative Black?
Or a Black queer feminist digital alchemist response to something. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I would say a generative Black queer digital response might look like, looks like the creation of a completely new platform, like a creation from the community that actually isn't beholden to the architecture that most platforms assume that people want. That's more generative. And in the 4th chapter, in talking to some of these Tumblr users, I asked them what they're looking for in a platform, and then give some really wonderful responses of what kind of space would be exciting to them as opposed to the platforms that currently exist. So I'm really interested in what we create for ourselves as an example of where, we can go.
Okay, there are so many other great questions. There was one that I was going to ask, so I'm going to prioritize that one, which is, I just feel like we have to ask the question. And the question is, how does misogynoir relate to intersectionality?
So I see misogynoir as, like intersectionality, naming something that Black feminists have been talking about in a bunch of different ways before the term kind of gets popularized. So I do see misogynoir existing in context of all of the Black feminists who have come before and who have tried to address these questions like intersectionality. And I owe a great debt to Combahee River Collective statement for just the framing and the way that they understand and formulate ideas about who Black women are and what our particular standpoint offers the world. And similarly, I think intersectionality owes that text and others a great debt as well.
Okay, they're such great questions. Let's take one more and then I have a final question, and I appreciate if people can stay on, that's great. If not, we'll totally understand. Here's the question. Could you please speak more to the internalization of misogynoir amongst Black women in the daily lives of Black women outside of the academy? What are your hopes? This is kind of gonna be my last question, so there you go. What are the hopes for all Black women upon reading your book?
Oh, I was asked a version of this today, and I went back to Toni Cade Bambara, the revolution begins in the South. And I think that until we root out internalized misogynoir, we're gonna still have some issues. And one of the ways that I think internalized misogynoir operates is in, of course, competition between Black women and this idea of who's a respectable Black woman and who is who is viewed in a particular light. And I do think that we're gonna have to do a lot more work around addressing class and what across class solidarity looks like for Black women, that also is attentive to the way respectability politics gets moved and mobilized in ways that prevents cross-class solidarity. So I'm really interested in moving forward in a way where Black women can talk to each other about some of the ways that respectability has shown up in our ideas about both social and economic class in our relationships to one another as a result.
Fantastic. Okay, last question is, I want to know what makes you happy besides the fact that you're coming to Chicago in the summer, but like, what makes you happy? What makes you laugh? What gives you hope?
I still love a good meme. I love a good, I love a good tweet that is very relevant. I just feel like the things that Black people create online give me so much joy. There's a young Black woman from Arkansas who does these great renditions of like Black elders in the community. They're absolutely perfect. She does not miss. And it just gives me so much joy to see these reflections of the Black people I know. And that is a real gift that these digital platforms give us. They reflect our communities to us. And I'm so grateful for that.
Fantastic. Moya, thank you for the conversation, for, your career and your activism. Thank you for the brilliance of the book. And really you're just such a wonderful, generous, curious, revolutionary person that we are all lucky to be in conversation with you. And I definitely was lucky to do it today. So I want to thank everyone for showing up. Thanks the folks at CSRPC and seminary, and in particular the staff who pulled all this together. We hope everyone has a lovely evening. So goodbye.
Thank you so much.